Prime Field.
Welcome to Prime Field, where the season is treated like evidence, and identity is treated like the real prize. In one December game, UConn won by 37 points, and still produced a statistic that Geno Auriemma could not ignore. Without KK Arnold available, the Huskies committed 21 turnovers and 19 fouls. The scoreboard said dominance. The tape suggested something else. A team that could score, but could not always govern itself. That is the central problem of UConn's 2025-26 season. The program is not only chasing a 12th national championship, it is trying to answer a question left behind by the exits of Paige Beckers and Caitlin Chen. A vacuum of identity, not talent. Into that void, Auriemma has placed 2 point guards built from opposing instincts. KK Arnold, the stabilizer, structural discipline, lateral containment, and controlled possession. And Kayleigh Heckel, the transfer, a guard defined by vertical velocity and high-risk improvisation. The documentary's question is precise. In the absence of generational icons, can UConn synthesize Arnold's discipline and Heckel's verticality into a singular championship identity? Or will the friction fracture the team's engine when March applies pressure? The season is not a rivalry of animosity. It is a collision of basketball philosophy between the steering wheel and the race car, and it starts with an experiment. For 2 years, UConn's rhythm ran through Beckers' precision and Chen's abrasive command. Their departures did not erase skill from the roster, but they removed the program's operating system. Auriemma's response was not to replace them with a single successor. It was to split the role and force a synthesis. KK Arnold, a junior, had served an apprenticeship behind those stars. Her profile fit what UConn historically trusted at point guard: calm decisions, defensive containment, and the ability to reset a possession when the offense drifted. Kayleigh Heckel, a sophomore transfer from USC, arrived as something different. Auriemma had once passed on recruiting her out of high school, describing her as a race car driver who would need a garage full of cars because she crashed so often. Her arrival through the transfer portal signaled a shift, a pragmatic admission that modern opponents, especially the sport's most athletic teams, can force UConn into games where chaos is not optional. Early practices exposed the contrast. Arnold executed structure. Heckel bent it, broke it, and created offense anyway. The staff saw both outcomes, the points, and the instability that sometimes came with them. The early season would not decide the argument, but it would establish the terms. KK Arnold is 5'9", a junior, and visually unmistakable. Low stance, lateral slides, hesitation dribbles, kick-out passes. Her value is often inverse to her visibility. When possessions become frantic, she resets the stack. When rotations scramble, she closes space and rotates to the ball. Her reliability, though, carries a cost in narrative and potentially in tactics. Arnold's instinct is to facilitate rather than dominate. In a season searching for a new backcourt alpha, her reluctance to hunt perimeter shots becomes a point of tension. Her absence later in the season would illustrate how much quiet structure had been holding together. Kayleigh Heckel is also 5'9", but her movement operates on a different axis: north-south acceleration, instant downhill pressure. A floater package designed for the intermediate paint. Defensive gambles that can create highlights or create 5-on-4 exposures if they miss. Her profile is not the traditional UConn point guard. She is an accelerant. Above both is Geno Auriemma, now deep into a career defined by perfectionism. His frustration with sloppiness is documented, and yet he has voluntarily inserted a chaotic element into his system. He praises Arnold's stability. He marvels at Heckel's speed. And across the season, he becomes the prism through which the conflict is understood, a mastermind forced to negotiate with his own rigidity. But the point guard to conflict is not isolated. It is upstream from the scorers who depend on it. AZ Fudd, an elite shooter returning from injury, needs paint touches that collapse defenses into catch-and-shoot windows. Sarah Strong, the freshman phenom and top recruit, requires the ball delivered in precise spots. Ashlyn Shade becomes the spacing guard who can complete lineups built for pace. The point guards do not only run the team, they determine how the team's finishers are allowed to function. The season's early games provided a clean demonstration of the dilemma. Arnold could start, stabilize, and keep the machine aligned, while the offense could still appear static at times. Then Heckel would enter, and the geometry would change. In the season opener against Louisville, she scored 14 points in 23 minutes. The numbers mattered, but the mechanism mattered more. Her vertical pressure forced defensive reactions that structured basketball sometimes struggles to demand without elite shot-making. This is where the race car metaphor became usable. Heckel did not probe, she attacked. She did not wait for windows. She tried to manufacture them, but a system predicated on perfectionism does not grade players only on points. It grades them on possession governance and on whether aggression can be controlled. That question would become unavoidable when the control variable disappeared. December produced the season's clearest control group. KK Arnold suffered a nasal fracture and missed the game against Providence. UConn still won, and won by 37. But the process deteriorated in measurable ways. The Huskies committed 21 turnovers. They also recorded 19 fouls. The offense, despite the margin, was described as sputtering and chaotic. Auriemma was furious. The result functioned like a laboratory test. It proved that Heckel could generate points, but not yet generate order across 40 minutes at a level Auriemma historically demanded from his primary ball handlers. It also clarified Arnold's role. She was not simply a starter by tradition. Her assist-to-turnover ratio, around 2.47, represented stability in its purest form. A coach trusts that number with a 3-point lead late. Heckel's ratio, around 1.64, was acceptable for a scoring guard. It was riskier for a primary governor of a championship system. The season's tension then was not about which player was better. It was about which kind of basketball UConn could survive, and which kind it would need against elite opponents. That conflict becomes sharpest when it is broken into mechanics. The data complicates the stereotypes. The wild slasher is often expected to be less efficient than the disciplined floor general, but the season's shooting numbers create a paradox. Arnold's field goal percentage sits around 53.7%. Heckel's around 51.2%. Both are elite for guards, achieved in opposite ways. Arnold's efficiency is linked to curated selection, transition layups, and open cuts. Heckel's efficiency is linked to difficulty, contested drives, floaters, and pull-ups. For a 5'9" guard living in the paint, shooting above 51% is statistically unusual, and the report ties it directly to her floater package from 5'8 feet, a tool that reduces reliance on finishing at the rim against taller shot blockers. From three-point range, neither profile resolves spacing cleanly. Arnold's percentage is listed at 22.2%. Heckel's historical percentage from USC is listed at 28.3%. That reality invites defensive sag, and has downstream consequences for the driving lane Sarah Strong needs. On defense, the contrast is even more visible. Arnold embodies containment, the wall, lateral slides that keep the ball handler in front. Steals derive from pressure rather than reaching. Heckel plays more like a predator in the passing lanes, the hawk. Her gambles can ignite transition, but when they miss, they create 5-on-4 situations that force bigs into aggressive rotations and foul risk. In a system built on shell integrity, that style creates both value and volatility. The report identifies the season's key offensive KPI, paint touches. Heckel creates them through vertical aggression. She gets downhill instantly, often without a screen. That rim pressure collapses defenses, and can free AZ FUD for catch-and-shoot windows. Arnold enters the paint differently. Horizontal probing, facilitation, resetting. It can be efficient, but against elite defenses, windows close quickly, and probing can die before it produces collapse. The conclusion is not that one approach is correct. It is that the roster so it needs both, and that pushes Auriemma toward a solution he rarely preferred: combination. Auriemma's adjustment is framed as a rejection of the false choice. The solution is not suppression or replacement. It is lineup engineering. The three-guard look, Arnold, Heckel, and Shade, emerges as a structure where each archetype can be placed into a role that limits its weakness. In that alignment, Arnold can assume primary ball handling duties, reducing Heckel's turnover exposure. Heckel can function off the ball as a slasher, maximizing verticality without requiring constant governance. Shade supplies spacing that keeps driving lanes usable. The report points to a larger pattern, extreme tinkering early in the season, including 44 different lineup combinations across the first 120 minutes. That number reads like a coach searching for the exact minutes where coexistence becomes chemistry. It also fits a broader tactical shift described as the hockey line shift, mass substitutions that change the game's physics by injecting a hyper-fast unit. In that context, Heckel's defensive gambling can transform from liability into a tool for turnover generation, because the scheme expects disruption rather than perfect containment on every possession. The synthesis also runs in both directions. Arnold can learn aggression by proximity to Heckel's attack. Heckel can learn possession value by proximity to Arnold's discipline. The goal is convergence, not similarity. But regular season solutions are not the same as tournament proof. March does not ask for potential, it asks for functioning under stress. The report frames South Carolina as the ultimate test of the debate. A team with interior defense defined by size and shot blocking forces UConn into non-negotiable problems. Against that type of opponent, a non-shooting point guard becomes a tactical vulnerability. If Arnold hesitates on the perimeter, defenders can sag and suffocate the lanes that Strong and FUD need. Horizontal probing can fail when windows close too quickly. Heckel, by contrast, provides the one weapon described as faster than recovery, transition speed, her ability to attack before the defense sets, and her floater as a specific counter to rim protection becomes essential. The report forecasts a reality where the gambler must play, and the program must accept turnovers as a cost of doing business in exchange for pressure. The second narrative peak is described as a possible collision with USC, Heckel's former team, with Juju Watkins identified as the premier scorer. The report frames this as the perfect synthesis test, Arnold's defense and governance paired with Heckel's intimate familiarity and offensive pressure. In that scenario, the game becomes less about one point guard winning a job, and more about both being required for the same outcome. Tournament basketball does not reward purity. It rewards tools that solve specific problems at specific times. And that leads directly to the season's legacy question: what it would mean if this experiment works. If UConn wins Banner 12 with this backcourt structure, the story would not be that KK Arnold defeated Kayleigh Heckel, or that chaos replaced discipline. The legacy would belong to synthesis. Arnold represents the floor, the guarantee that UConn will not beat itself. Heckel represents the ceiling, the possibility that UConn can outrun and puncture defenses built to deny structure. For Geno Auriemma, that outcome would function as validation of adaptation. A coach long associated with perfectionist governance would have demonstrated the ability to incorporate a transfer portal wildcard without surrendering the program's foundational identity. The report's conclusion is direct. The PG-1 conflict is the engine of the season's drama, and the solution is not a verdict. It is coexistence. In a landscape no longer anchored by a single Beckers-like conductor, UConn's path becomes aggregation. The brain and the legs, discipline and verticality. The race car needs a driver, and the driver needs a fast car. And in 2025 and 26, UConn's season becomes a test of whether two opposing instincts can become one championship identity, before March forces the final answer.
Prime Field!